Hello and welcome to Sam Not So Wise. My name is Sam, and today it's time to join the hordes of booktubers making the top 10 lists. Today is my top 10 books of 2025. Now mine is a little bit late, and that is because you're probably sick of hearing, if you watch my channel regularly, that my baby was born in December, the start of December, so I was just tinsy weensy little bit busy last month, but here it is. And last week I did my best and worst, kind of 12 categories, I think it was, like most surprising, most disappointing, all that kind of stuff. So if you haven't checked that out, I'll pop a link in the description and you can watch it there. I'm not going to really go into many details in this video, not going deep into my analyses of these books. Just kind of general thoughts and why they are in my top 10. If you want more thoughts on my reading, then you can check my wrap-ups over the year. However, I haven't done a wrap-up for November or December. Again, baby. But I will be doing that hopefully by the end of next week, so you can find some of them in that wrap-up when it comes. I've only got a couple of caveats for this top 10 list. I'm doing no rereads, and where it applies, I'm doing one book per series, and that is actually only one in the top 10. We'll get there anyway. So with that and much further ado, let's talk about my top 10 reads of 2025. Now, this is a top 10, so I'm obviously going to be talking about more than 10 books, because I need to talk about my honourable mentions for the year. Those books that were great but didn't quite make it into the top 10. By the way, my reading year I thought was good, not the best, so some really good books in there, but there is room for improvement in this year, and I'm hoping to get to some absolute bangers, but let's get on with the books that I really enjoyed. So first I'll talk about Inverted World, which is one of the last books I read in 2025 by Christopher Priest, the first one I've read by him. This book just had absolutely brilliant world building, a lot of mysteries around this world, brilliant sci-fi concepts, very unique, which was really what drew me to it, as well as this mystery surrounding the world. And it ends with a wonderful reveal that kind of explains a lot of what is going on. The only reason that this isn't in the top 10 is because I felt it could be longer. It's only a short book, under 300 pages. And I feel like after the reveal, things just happened really quickly and ended really quickly. And I just really enjoyed it, so I just wanted a little bit more exploration of that reveal. But absolutely fantastic book, and I'm definitely excited to read more from Christopher Priest. Next up we have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. I always forget her name for some reason, which has kind of been a YouTube darling this year. And I absolutely love dystopian books. This is a very dystopian book. It's quite a unique version, and it's a great look into basically what it means to be human in quite a depressing, sad way. There is no answers in this book to the plot. There's kind of a big mystery as to why this situation is happening, but nothing is revealed to you. And I find that kind of thing fun. I like open endings. I like open books where you can think about stuff and kind of try and come up with your own theories. I like that, and I like discussing theories with people, but that is not the point of the book. It is the themes, mainly due to surrounding what I was talking about earlier, kind of what it means to be human and loneliness and memory, that kind of stuff, all explored really well in a very short amount of pages. Also, the main character in this book, which is the perspective we get it from in first person, was brilliant, really fascinating, interesting character. It didn't get into the top 10 because it just didn't quite hit me as much as these other books did that are in the top 10. Really good, but I'm not quite on the hype wagon with the rest of the YouTubers that loved it this year. Next up, we have James by Percival Everett, which is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, which I also read this year, a couple of months before James. So I did that intentionally to kind of contrast the two books. This one is from Jim's perspective, if you've read it, which is the slave character. This is a really important book, in my opinion, that tells the untold side of this very famous classic. It's an interesting twist in there with some really fun communication devices which were really clever and just added a really great dimension to the story. It's very thoughtful, it's very emotional. And the only reason it isn't really in the top 10 is because it may be affected by the fact that I read Huckleberry Finn so close to it, because the first half of the book are basically one-to-one in terms of the story beats. So it was a little bit like, I know all this stuff, you know, the different perspectives were really interesting, but I wanted a little bit more. But absolutely fantastic book, really, really important, like I said, and I highly recommend you read it if you have or you haven't read Huckleberry Finn. My final honourable mention is, I forgot to pick it up because that's how professional I am, you've seen me do that before. It's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, a classic, but an unknown classic in many ways. I read this for school for my university degree. Like I said, this is highly underrated. People don't talk about Anne Bronte nearly as much as the other two. But this basically has two romance stories in it with a framed device. Two framing devices, actually. These are really interesting romances. I'm not really one for romance much. I don't mind a romance in my book, but this is essentially a romance book times two. But these are fascinating romances, believable in many ways. And this book shines, though, in its social commentary of the time, basically the position of women. That's hardly surprising, being a Bronte sister, from many different perspectives as well, which I thought was really interesting. Also, if you like hateable characters, there is one of the most hateable characters I've ever read in this book, and I love hateable characters, so this was just, you know, gripping for me. This is it's 400 pages-ish, but the text is really small. It took quite a while, but every page I was interested and I was very surprised, and I think she's only got one other book and I definitely want to read it. So those are the honourable mentions of the year. So let's get into the top 10 with number 10, and that is Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, my first ever Arthur C. Clarke. And this is many people's kind of one of their favourite sci-fi books ever, especially if they are into the classics. And I also obviously really enjoyed it, with it being in the top 10 at number 10. Now, there are two big twists in this book. Unfortunately for me, I was spoiled on one of them, the earlier one, so I knew this was coming and I was kind of waiting for it. That definitely affected my reading experience a little bit, but the other one later in the book was very impactful and kind of a grower. Like, it didn't really hit me at the time, but the more I thought about this twist and what it means to some of the people in this book, you know, the depth of it really came to me later as I thought about it more. And I really like that about books, when you can think about it later and be like, oh my God, that was actually really impactful. So I love the book for that. This is definitely a first contact book that is unique. The aliens are really interesting and different and just kind of iconic. If you've read this book, they are very iconic. And the situation is one of benevolent overlords, which I find kind of really interesting as well, which links into the fact that a lot of this book is based upon a utopian society. This is a type of story setting that I find really fascinating. If you know me, I love the Culture series. That is one of my favourite ever, which is a utopian society. And I just find the kind of exploration of theme in this world really different and just a unique playground to explore stuff that you can't in other books. So this is not going to be a top 10 sci-fi book of all time for me, but it was a fascinating read, a quick read, and a really good place to start my Clarke journey. At number 9, we have Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin, my first Martin outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. This is a vampire book set in the 1850s on the Mississippi River. Now, if you listen to my honourable mention section, you'll know that I read Huckleberry Finn and James, which is set at the exact same time. So it's my third book that I read in that exact same setting, which was really fascinating for me. And that, along with the descriptions in this book and the atmosphere, It just made a sublime reading experience where I really feel like I knew this world. It was partly to do with those other books, but also because Martin is so good at writing these settings. And like I said, the atmosphere was absolutely tangible. Now, I'm not usually a fan of vampire stories, vampire books. Saying that, I am actually watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the first time, which I'm loving. But generally, I'm not really a big vampire fan. But this one puts an interesting spin on the vampire trope, which is mixed in with kind of classic vampire characteristics as well. But it gave a unique flavour to vampires that I found really intriguing. We also have some really great thematic work in here relating to slavery, as you can imagine, with the time and the setting, with a great use of paralleling with vampires versus humans and humans versus slaves, which I thought was really interesting and really well done. But the crowning glory of this story are the characters, which is typical Martin, the two main characters in particular of Abner and York. So this was just a really fantastic book, and I definitely want to read more George R.R. Martin in the future. At number 8, we have Anathem by Neil Stephenson, which was my first Neil Stephenson book. You'll notice there were a lot of firsts for me this year, which was really exciting. This is a massive tome of a work. There's basically a book in two halves. Now, the first half is definitely my favourite of the two halves, but the second half still has merit. It did have a lot of flaws for me, but I still enjoyed it. It's just kind of hard to compare that second half to the first half, because this first half was an easy 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10, absolutely perfect. I absolutely loved it and was engrossed the whole time. And this is because it is in a totally unique setting. We have monks in monks in monasteries dedicated to the pursuit and preservation of knowledge that survive around a world that grows and declines just around it over countless generations. The world building was just absolutely sublime. The characters were great, and we had so many great concepts in here, as well as a lot of themes explored, usually linked to kind of scientific concepts that I find absolutely fascinating. It is quite heavy on the sci-fi and the physics explanations here, so if you don't like that kind of stuff, then maybe you won't like it, but I was engrossed. A mystery opens up at some point that pushes the story into the wider world. That was the part that I was less interested, but like I said, I still found it brilliant. This was a little bit long and wandering, but it was like a great start to my Stevenson journey, and I'm really excited to again read more of his in the future. So Anathem definitely deserves its place at number 8, if only for that perfect first half. At number 7, we have The Paper Menagerie and Other Stories by Ken Liu, which is a short story collection of fantasy and sci-fi short stories. This is my favourite short story collection so far ever. Now, short stories kind of don't often work well for me. I've read a few collections, I'm not sure how many now, like 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that. And it's something I'm working on because I really want to like short stories. And this one really did hit me the most out of the ones that I've read. As usual, there were a few that were just fine, kind of forgettable, but many of them were highly emotional, and that is the key point here, is they really brought emotions out of me. And there is just so much here in terms of theme crammed into these short stories. They had a lot of links, these themes, to do with kind of othering and exchanging of cultures, which makes sense if you know about Ken Liu's background. There were also some great plots in here and interesting concepts in the sci-fi stories themselves. If I had to pick my favourite story from the collection, it would be the titular story of The Paper Menagerie, which brought me to tears as I was sitting as a passenger in a car on the way to see some family, and I won't forget that because it was just such a beautiful but sad story that really just hit me, and that is why I'll remember it, and that is why it deserves its place at number 7 in my top 10. At number 6, we have House of Suns by Alistair Reynolds. I have read the 4 books in the Revelation Space series, which is one of my favourite series of all time, and I've also read another standalone called Aversion, which I really liked. But this book is often cited as people's favourite standalone of Reynolds, maybe even their favourite book by him, and it didn't disappoint for me. Obviously, number 6 in my top 10. Now, this is a sci-fi book that is truly epic in scale. The scale and the world building and the time scale as well are all just huge and epic, but not in a way that is too complex. It is very readable and with wonderful pacing. Now, this is basically a story of survival and mystery as a powerful group of people in this world get attacked, and we find out why, what's going on. And at the heart of the story is actually a surprisingly tender story of forbidden love. Again, not necessarily out there for romance books, but I don't mind a romance in my books. And this one was really quite interesting and heartwarming, so I really enjoyed that part of it. There's also a really fantastic robot character in this book that adds so much intrigue to the greater mystery in the story and the history of this world. So if you just love large-scale sci-fi books that have mystery and a hint of romance, this is one that you have to pick up and gives you a really good taste of Alistair Reynolds' writing. A truly wonderful, epic, standalone sci-fi book by Reynolds is my number 6. At number 5, we have The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, who is one of my favourite authors of all time. But this, even though it's number 5 in my top 10 of 2025, this isn't my favourite book by him. It isn't even my second favourite book by him. Those would be Cloud Atlas and Black Swan Green, but this is another brilliant book by him. It would sit at number 3 for me. Now, Mitchell loves his books to be made up of shorter stories, and this is another example in The Bone Clocks. This one doesn't play with structure and time like Cloud Atlas does, but has 5 stories from different perspectives in chronological order that are all connected in some way. The fantasy elements within this story, I didn't really care about that. It was more about the characters, because the character writing itself was 10 out of 10, superb, stellar, amazing work. All 5 characters were very distinct and amazingly developed over a short page count. And I really enjoyed that the connective tissue between the stories felt very intriguing and very believable as well. And it just added a great momentum to what could easily have been a very fragmented book, which it wasn't at all. The writing as well, Mitchell is just a top-class writer of prose and character voice, and has wonderful dashes of humour in it as well. This isn't one for people who absolutely love massive grand plots, but one for people who love character writing, theme, and great prose. So if you haven't read David Mitchell, The Bone Clocks deserves your attention and makes my number 5 of 2025. At number 4, we have The Green Mile by Stephen King, another one of my favourite authors, the 17th or 18th book I've read by him. Not one of his horror stories. I'm not particularly bothered about horror, although I have enjoyed his horror stories. But this was also quite light on the fantasy elements, and also has a lot smaller cast compared to his kind of small town stories, which I love, but I also enjoyed the fact that we had just a handful of characters in this book. But all of the signature King writing is here in this book. We have unbelievably great characters, real life people who you feel like you could know and you could meet walking down the street, and a story that is kind of slow moving but steadily grips you. It has an unbelievably emotional ending, another tearjerker, which is why it's so high on the list, and definitely not a bad ending. People say he can't end books, but I thought this one was ended beautifully. Now, this is also just dripping with thematic exploration and social commentary, a lot to do with race as well as kind of developmental issues within people. And like I said, it was an absolute tearjerker and definitely one of my favourite Stephen King books. If you haven't read The Green Mile, I would say that this is a wonderful place to start for Stephen King and is definitely deserving of its place at number 4 in my top 10. At number 3, we have A Pale View of Hills by Kazuo Ishiguro, another one of my favourite authors of all time. And with this book, I finished reading everything that he has written. And it's funny that the last book I read by him was the first book that he ever wrote. And my God, did he kick off in style with his writing. Now, this is a top 3 Ishiguro book for me. Again, probably number 3, I'm not sure. 2 and 3 are competing all the time, but number 1 is stuck. But to make it into the top 3 after reading all of his books is a great feat and is my number 3 of 2025. Now, this has his kind of classic subtlety of storytelling where he does it with so few words, with kind of this creeping underneath the text, this subtext that is going on and you kind of don't really realize until later. From the beginning, this book is highly emotionally charged, but Ishiguro completely floored me in the final few pages of this book. We get a complete perspective change with a really amazingly subtle piece of writing. It's amazing that this kind of one paragraph can completely just flip everything and just make you want to start the book again and read it with this new perspective. I didn't do that, but I kind of wish I did because it was just so impactful. We also just have wonderful thematic exploration, as always with Ishiguro, and just so much done in less than 200 pages. I think it's like 160 pages. He does so much more in this book than a lot of people can do in 500 pages or more. It's all to do with kind of like the price of war, cultural and national identity, the place of women in Japan, but most importantly, the weight of grief. This is just a masterpiece in showing and not telling through subtle cues that if you're not paying attention, you might miss, but if you do, they just point to real profundity. So really happy to end my Ishiguro reading with one of my favourites of him, and A Pale View of Hills is my number 3 of 2025. At the number 2 spot, we have Memories of Ice by Stephen Erickson, the third book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I read the first 3 books of the series in 2025, and all 3 of them could have been here. I was very tempted to just say the first 3 books of the Malazan series. Now, the joy of Malazan for me is how different the books are to each other whilst telling this grander story of this huge world. All 3 of the books have insane Malazalanchas where we have great convergences after brilliant build-up. Very long build-up, I must admit, but brilliant build-up and great convergences. The world building is obviously truly epic, and even though it's impossible to understand everything, it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter if you don't understand everything. You're given enough to be able to know what is important for this book, and it will set you up for other stuff later. At least I assume. At least it has done that already for me in 3 books. The characters in these books are iconic and with enormous range. Each book is very thematic and lend to just emotional impact by these huge endings after their grand build-ups. Now, Memories of Ice takes the spot, but I did love them all. I think for this book, the journey of the character Ikovian, if you've read the book, as well as kind of the difficulties of joining 2 previously opposing sides, made for just a really thrilling and deep ride of a book. So I am loving my journey through Malazan. I am 50% of the way through the next book, and Memories of Ice deserves its place as at number 2 in my top 10 of 2025. So my top book of 2025 is, to nobody's surprise, an Ian M. Banks book, and it is The Algebraist. What a shock, right? Anyone who has viewed my channel at all will know that Ian M. Banks is my favourite author, and guess what? He did it again with this standalone sci-fi book. Now, I was kind of nervous to read this. It's not set in the Culture universe, which is my favourite sci-fi series of all time. So I was scared that he wasn't going to continue his greatness in his standalone sci-fi books outside of the Culture. But I obviously didn't need to be worried because this was absolutely brilliant. This is a sprawling epic of a space opera. Now, if you want to read books written by authors with unbelievable imagination, then this is where you need to start reading, because that man had the most insane and most amazing, most creative imagination, and it just absolutely is shown full tilt in all of his books, but definitely in this one. Now, it also has a truly novel concept around this book, and it's just a roller coaster of a ride. The concepts, like, for example, we have aliens that live in gas giants, and we spend a lot of time in gas giants, a unique place setting for a story. It's not just there, and like I said, it is sprawling, and his imagination is just spread all over the galaxy. But this book has everything that I am looking for in a book. It has fantastic world building, it has deep thematic exploration, it has humour. Banks always has great humour. It has wonderful characters, it has good prose, the plot is insane, and there are many a twist within the story. Now, look, this may not be for everyone. I understand that. Not everybody is going to love Banks as much as I do. And it is a little bit too long. This is a thick, chunky boy. It's also quite complex at times, and maybe not the deepest exploration of theme, but it is there if you want it. It's definitely there. But I think this is just a tour de force of a sci-fi writing book from an underrated author that just deserves more respect. Now, I still think about this book quite often, and I read this in January. So a book that I read in January is my number one, and it just stayed in my mind the whole year. And I think it is probably a really good place to start with Ian M. Banks if you want to read a tome, because it is just really just represents his writing really well, and is just obviously, in my opinion, an absolutely fantastic book. So, shock, surprise, who would have thought it? Ian M. Banks takes my number one spot for 2025 with the standalone book, The Algebraist. So that is it. I have completely wrapped up 2025 now. No more 2025 content coming out from me. Let's look to the future and get into the new year. But if you've made it this far into the video, I thank you so much for watching. It really helps. Let me know what you think about my list, if you've read any of these, and if you liked them, if you hated them, anywhere in between. I love having conversations with you in the comments. Also, let me know some of your favourites. I'm always looking to hear what people are loving at the moment. I like to see the trends of reading. But I think that is it. So if you liked the video, please press like. If you're new to the channel, think about subscribing. My next video will be my November and December wrap up. I know it's a little bit late, but like I said, I've been busy looking after a tiny little baby. So that will be coming soon. But that's it. So thank you again, and I'll see you in another video soon. Goodbye.